Welcome to Season 6, Episode 5. Sarah, we're here. It's the final episode of this season. This season has been all about brain health. And before we dive into it, we need to tell the people who we are. My name is Chris Powell. I'm your co-host for today.
And I'm Dr. Sarah Sharman, here to help you understand the science.
And you've helped us understand a lot of science this season. We've covered a lot with brain health, but that may not be an accurate description of where we've actually been this season. We have talked about brain health, but really what we've talked about is something else, brain disease. Tell us about that.
That's right. We really talked a lot about diseases and disorders that can occur in your brain across your lifetime. So we really looked at that in a couple of ways, but one was looking at it linearly across your lifetime. So we started looking at early development with those neurodevelopmental diseases, which we talked about for 2 episodes. And then we focused a lot on late life aging and those neurodegenerative diseases, which we also kind of hit for about 2 episodes.
Now, most of these diseases and the stories that we've told this season, we really come into an awareness of these when they affect us, right? And that's just how it is as people. But it kind of perpetuates this cycle of where it's out of sight, out of mind until it's needed at that point. And then we dive into it and we really get it. So what if we just start looking at everything from a different perspective and not wait for it to come and hit us in the face to where we have to pay attention to it? But what if there was a different way of kind of looking at that? Like, that's where we need to go this season, because there's a lot at stake, right? Like, if you are diagnosed with one of these diseases, there's the obvious symptoms that you have to deal with, right? If you are diagnosed with a neurodegenerative or a neurodevelopmental, there's a broad range of implications there, and it's going to affect your life, but it's also going to affect the life of those around you. Your caregivers, it's going to cost us a ton of money, not only out of pocket, but also as a society in taking care of these issues. So there's a lot at stake here. So Sarah, what if we kind of broke that cycle of waiting for it to hit us and then start caring about it? Like, what if there was a different way of looking at that? Can we go down that road for a minute?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. And I think that's something that we're really going to focus on in this episode, but kind of that idea of shifting our mindset from being reactive to being proactive. So instead of just focusing on the disease, diagnosis, treatment, getting someone back close to health, what if we kept someone in health for longer? Like, what if we figured out how we can live healthy lives and maybe prevent or at least delay some of these diseases that we've talked about?
In our conversations getting ready for this episode, there was one phrase that you threw out there that I think would be helpful. And you made it, you talked about the difference between a lifespan and a health span. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that's going to be important for this episode.
Absolutely. I think it's something that we should all be thinking about. So we are living in a time now where we're living longer than we ever have before. So we have a really big aging population, people living into their 80s, 90s, even up into their 100s. So, our lifespans are becoming longer, right? But what about our health span? Like, can we keep people healthy into those 80, 90, 100 years? And how do we do that? And how are people thinking about how we do that? I think it's really interesting and something that's super relevant these days.
So for this episode, the key for all of us is to shift the way that we think about things, right? We're going to look from different perspectives. And to do that, we're going to bring in a few voices. We're going to bring in 2 HudsonAlpha voices we're going to introduce you to, and also a voice from Dr. Jennifer Lovejoy, who's with the Phenome Health Institute. So let's jump into those interviews.
Yeah, hi. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I am currently working at a nonprofit research institute in Seattle called Phenome Health, where I'm the Chief Translational Science Officer. And I have a background working with sort of big data and health coaching. I have a background in behavioral science and trying to understand how we can use lifestyle and behavioral approaches to optimize health and prevent chronic disease.
So on Tiny Expeditions, we talk a whole lot about the genome, but with this new project that we're going to talk about in a little bit, we're hearing more and more about the phenome. So our listeners aren't super familiar with that. So what exactly is a phenome, and how does that complement the genome?
Yeah, great question. So the phenome is everything about you that we can measure and that changes over time, which is not the genome. You're born with a set of genes and you're going to have those for the rest of your life, but everything else about your body changes. So we can think of really simple examples like your eye color or your hair color. That's an example of the phenome. Things that maybe get measured at your doctor's office at an annual visit, like your cholesterol or your blood sugar, those are things that we can measure that are part of the phenome, and they change over time. They change throughout our lifespan, and they change depending on things that we're doing in our life. And more recently, we have gotten better and better tools to dive even deeper into the phenome with what's called omics or multi-omics. So, we talk about genomics, but, we can also think about proteomics, which is about the proteins, or metabolomics, which is about the metabolites that are in our bloodstream circulating, the gut microbiome. Many people have heard about that. That's another type of phenome measure that can be done. So, but at the simplest level, it's really just everything we can measure about you that changes over time.
Your work at Phenome Health is centered on a data-driven model of wellness. So can you take just a moment and, first off, just define what does wellness mean? I think we all have a different concept of that term. So what are we talking about when we say wellness?
Sure. So the funny thing is, we don't really have a definition of wellness that is standardized and quantifiable, right? Everybody talks about, as you say, everyone has their own subjective opinion of what wellness means. And yet we really want to be able to quantify. We can quantify disease. We can measure things in the blood, or we can do a scan or something and say, oh, this is wrong. But we are really working. It's one of the things we're trying to do at Phenome Health is figure out, how do we quantify wellness? And particularly, how do we start to capture the transitions from wellness to disease and disease back to wellness? And what does that look like at a macro level? What does it look like at the micro level? And how does that all fit together? So we're working to answer that question of what is wellness. But I think still people do have a sense of what it means. And I think for me anyway, it's more than just the absence of disease. I think, just because you aren't sick doesn't mean you're well. And so increasingly we're looking at, what does it mean to really thrive, to really have energy, to have a sense of purpose and feel like, your life is going the way you want. So wellness is more than just physical wellness in absence of disease. It really is kind of a holistic measure. And so being able to incorporate those things in our measure of wellness is important too. It's not just about the biology. So I think that's a fun area that we are continuing to explore.
So earlier you alluded to the fact that we've gotten here with the ability to be able to detect this phenomic data because of a lot of advances with different tools and technologies. Can you expound on that and kind of talk about what has made it possible to do this type of work?
Yeah, well, certainly I won't touch too much on the genome because I'm sure you talk about that a lot, and the advent of, different kinds of DNA sequencing technologies that have now brought the genome, being able to do whole genome sequencing well within reach and for a very limited cost. The same kind of thing has happened with some of the other omics that we can measure. So some of it has just been developing new technologies that help with scaling and efficiencies. Some of it has really been the development of new technology. So wearable technology is something I haven't really touched on. But as I mentioned, a lot of the important things about phenomics have to do with our interaction with our environment as well as our behavior. So knowing how much we're sleeping, knowing our physical activity, knowing our stress levels, those are things that we can actually measure through wearables quite well, through, fitness watches and rings and chest straps and all of that. So that technology, of course, has advanced tremendously as computational technology has improved, as we've gotten AI that has enabled the interpretation of data and, again, much faster quantification of things. And so I think all of that has come together to really give us some amazing tools to quantify phenomics in a way that we certainly couldn't 10 years ago, or if we did, it was going to cost us a lot more and take a lot longer to get at the answers.
So when we think about all of that information, how do you see all of it working together, like genomics, phenomics, lifestyle data? How does all of that come together to form the future of medicine?
So bringing everything together is absolutely the key. And the field of systems biology, which originated some, 3-4 decades ago, really starts to address that, because we don't want to look at these things in silos, right? Sometimes that is the problem with conventional medicine, that we are looking at things in silos and not taking into account what might be going on in other parts of the body that could have a big role. For example, maybe someone gets a drug for a heart condition, but that same drug goes throughout the entire body, and perhaps it affects the kidneys, perhaps it affects the brain. And so, really thinking about the body as a system is key to all this. And so it is a huge amount of data. It takes a lot of computational power and also different kinds of statistical techniques than conventional statistics to be able to look at all of this data in an integrated way. At Phenome Health, we're using something called knowledge graphs, which are giant graphical representations of the interactions between data, links between two different pieces of data, for example, but expanded to the millions. And from that, we can get information about biological networks. If we disturb something over here, we see a change over here. What does that look like? So there are these advanced computational tools now that enable us to look into all of that data and interpret it and understand it in, again, ways that we really couldn't 10, 20 years ago.
Here at Hudson Alpha, we've been talking a lot recently about the HOPE AD research project, which we'll cover later in this episode. But one term that comes up a lot in that I think is relevant to some of the work you guys are doing is multimodal lifestyle interventions. Would you mind kind of defining that for us and maybe walking us through what that might look like?
Yeah, it's a really important concept, particularly it seems like related to brain health and aging and the brain, although I think it probably applies to a number of other age-related conditions as well. And so all it really means is that we are putting a bunch of different lifestyle interventions together in one. So we've got nutrition interventions, we've got exercise, we have stress management, sleep, social interventions, because social isolation and loneliness is a big risk factor for cognitive decline in older people, and a kind of lifelong learning and cognitive training. So doing specific brain exercises, just like we have to exercise our body with physical workouts, we also have to keep exercising our brain in different ways. And there are a variety of ways of doing that. So when we talk about multimodal or multi-domain lifestyle interventions, it really means we're putting all of those things together and supporting people in engaging in that variety of healthy lifestyle activities that is going to best support them. Now, clearly not everybody is going to need as much support in each of those domains. Some people are already doing really well in a couple of them and maybe not so well in others. So it's really figuring out, and we'll be using health coaches in the HOPE AD project to really tailor that based not only on their biological data, their genetics and phenomic data that we'll get, but also on their own lifestyle preferences, their current activities, and what they're willing to do. But we're trying to get people to a good level of, kind of in compliance with national guidelines if they exist, like for exercise, 150 minutes a week, getting people up to that of moderate exercise. Could be walking, could be strolling through the park, whatever it may be. So that's what it means when we bring all of that together. And what's exciting is that now a number of studies, and there was actually a new one that just came out this week that has been long awaited, the big US Pointer study, which talked about how a structured multimodal lifestyle intervention, like what we're doing in HOPE AD, actually produced much better results in terms of cognition than a self-guided or sort of, do-it-yourself approach to lifestyle. So we know that this approach does work, and it works in people who are at high risk for developing Alzheimer's because of their family history or their genetics. And so getting this more out into the public so people realize that there are approaches that they can take to really preventing and reducing their risk for Alzheimer's is also important, because it's a scary disease. And people often think that, there's nothing I can do about it. Again, I don't want to know because there's nothing I can do about it. Well, again, if you start early enough, if you start in midlife, 50s, 60s, there's actually a lot you can do about it through lifestyle.
So far, we've been talking about phenomics as a whole for a healthier life, but this season is about brain health, so we want to shift to a more specific application of phenomic data in a project that's studying Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. So this is an exciting new collaboration between HudsonAlpha, Phenome Health, and the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. So we sat down to talk with Nick and Meagan Cochran to learn more about this project.
So my name is Nick Cochran. I'm a faculty investigator at HudsonAlpha, and I study Alzheimer's disease and related dementias.
And I'm Meagan Cochran. I'm a genetic counselor by training, and I have the privilege to be the director of clinical education here at HudsonAlpha, as well as the director of the Smith Family Clinic for Genomic Medicine.
So we've been talking all about the brain this season and just how complex it is and how difficult it has historically been to study. So what are some of the big challenges for detecting Alzheimer's risk early? And how are some of these phenomic approaches going to help with that?
Yeah, so I think part of it is just an understanding of where that risk comes from. And we're in a much better place today than we have been in the past of understanding lots of different genetic factors as well as some of the lifestyle factors and how those things kind of work together to add up to somebody's risk. And that's something that we hope to learn more about with this study. One of the other things that's been particularly challenging about Alzheimer's disease is science has told us that these protein changes in the brain start to happen potentially decades before the first symptom ever occurs, but those have been really hard to screen for. Typically, these protein changes that happen in the brain, you have to have really specialized imaging in order to find them. They're not going to show up on a regular MRI. And so this is something that often, there are specialized centers that are pretty far apart that most healthy people aren't visiting. Insurance isn't covering these tests. And so up until this point, unless you had a really good reason to be looking at somebody's brain for that particular type of protein, you weren't going to see it. So I think now we're in a place where, thanks to some of the new blood-based biomarkers, it puts us in a much better position to be able to screen people more broadly, where you don't have to go to a specialized center. You just have to go to a doctor who can place a test order and then go get your blood drawn. And so I think that puts us in a really unique position to be able to have insight into some of these things in a way that we just have not before.
Particularly when we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, one thing that people want is hope, right? And the name of this study kind of plays off of that, Hope AD. So why choose that name? I assume that there's something more to it. What does it stand for? And really, what are you trying to get across with this research?
Right. So you're correct. Hope AD does stand for something. So what it stands for is healthy outcomes through phenomic exploration. And particularly phenomics is a tough word. That's one that's, requires some definition. But the rest of it is fairly straightforward. And the idea here really is just to get a really deep profile, measure as much as we can about what people's different markers look like that may indicate that they may be at high risk for dementia. And then there's also a component of applying an intervention to offer that ability to say, okay, here are the things that we know may be able to shift risk when modified. Let's get you to the healthiest place possible so that you're doing everything that you can, right? And so what we're really hoping to achieve overall is to really push the envelope on pre-symptomatic detection of risk for these diseases. So where we have lots of evidence from different scientific studies that have been done over the previous years that have really come together just in the past couple of years in knowing things that we can look at that really provide a comprehensive profile, things that you can't do anything about like genetics, but then things that you can do something about like some of these lifestyle changes. So diet, exercise, things that are related to that like high blood pressure. And so that's really the goal, right, is to push the envelope on this pre-symptomatic detection and to understand attitudes around that as well.
So let's say I come into the program, am accepted into the program. Can you tell us a little bit more in depth about what kind of data will you be obtaining and how will you use that data to then guide the interventions that you would take one through?
Right, absolutely. So there's 2 stages to the study, and there's different data that is collected at each stage. So For the screening stage, that's where we're trying to screen 200 individuals. And Meagan has described some of the measures that they'll actually receive back the information. That's useful for us from a scientific sense as well. In addition, there's materials that will be collected, blood that we can then profile for all sorts of other markers that are really good for future scientific research. And that's something that really pushes the envelope on current analysis techniques, either looking at those things individually or together. And some of the new kind of machine learning, or some people may say AI type approaches, to look at that really complicated type of data, kind of all of these different things that are present in the blood and how that may be relevant to risk going forward. And having that at the screening stage is really important. Then at the high risk stage, we're going to get even more information, even deeper information that's helpful not only for the individual and how they approach their life, but also for the scientific community as well. So some of the deeper information we'll get there are things like clinical labs, where that will be information that's helpful for them to tweak, for example, their diet and exercise regimen. And it also is helpful to us as a scientific community to know how do some of these things respond. And then we'll also measure some of those same blood measures that we have talked about that would be measured at the screening stage as well, but now at multiple time points. So that gives us data as scientists that we call longitudinal data. It's very helpful for seeing changes over time. So this is going to be a really rich data set that's helpful for discovery and for development of future strategies for detecting and monitoring these diseases.
So I know I've seen a lot of stuff in the news lately about Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and some of it seems adjacent to what you guys are doing. How is HopeAD different from previous or current efforts to study or intervene in Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I think, it's important to recognize that the process of science is all about taking what other folks have done and learned and then building on the next step. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're trying to take the information that has been shown to be helpful in other studies and apply it to a unique population in a unique way. So I think there's a couple of things here. One, we're talking about the Deep South. And when we think about places where lifestyle intervention in particular can make a difference, the Deep South seems pretty ripe for that in terms of getting people to move more, eat better, all of those things. So I think that is a unique piece. I think the fact that we are doing this in an asymptomatic population is something that's a lot newer. So many of the studies in the field have been done on people who either already have a diagnosis of dementia or are at least at that mild cognitive impairment stage. So we're really kind of stepping back even further than that, so kind of winding back the clock and doing this in a way with a group that hasn't been done as much in the past. And then I think kind of getting to what Nick was talking about with the phenomics side of it, just this deep integration of all of these different features. We're not just looking at genetics, we're not just looking at lifestyle, we're looking at so many different pieces together that I think we have a real opportunity here to make these really interesting discoveries.
Let's take just a moment and look back over the episode. So we've covered a lot of ground. So let's do our TLDR that we've been doing over the season, right? So what really stuck out to you? Is there anything that you noticed that we need to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think for me, it was the conversation about, this whole idea of lifespan versus health span. So, I mean, historically, everyone is out for, the fountain of youth. How can I stay younger for longer? How can I look young for longer? But this has me thinking that maybe we flip that and we should look for that fountain of health. And maybe things like genomics and phenomics are going to help us find that.
The fountain of health. We've got to rewrite some literature here if we're going to make that transition.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So I'm going to state the obvious here for my TLDR. And we all kind of don't look forward to going to our yearly physicals because we all know that we're going to get a lot of great information, but we're also going to be told by our doctor, you need to start eating better. You need more exercise, right? None of us want to hear that. But in listening to our guest over this episode, I think I'm going to start paying attention to that a little bit more because it is an integrated whole, right? Like one thing affects another, and before we know it, we've either got a healthy life or an unhealthy life, and that's the difference.
Yeah, and along those same lines, just thinking about all the technology that we have available to us now to get this kind of data. So, I mean, obviously, genomics isn't something that's readily available to everyone just like every day, but like I wear a fitness watch and I count my steps and that's about it. So maybe just like thinking about paying attention more to the things that are available to us that can help us learn more about our own health.
Yeah, you got to use it to get that 30 minutes of exercise in at least, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of great things for us to consider, and I think over the course of this season, we have covered a lot of ground with disease, but I was very happy for us to wind up where we did in talking about health, right? Because that's the ultimate goal, like you said so perfectly before. So let's do this. Let's end this here, and we're going to be back next season, but for right now, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us for this season on Brain Health. We hope you learned a lot about your brain and the research being done in brain health.
And like Chris said, we'll be back in a few months with a brand new season of Tiny Expeditions, so make sure you're following us somewhere so you'll know when we're back.
Tiny Expeditions is a podcast about genetics, DNA, and inheritance from the HudsonAlpha Institute for Biotechnology. We're a nonprofit research institution in Huntsville, Alabama, with a very unique mission.
We bring together scientists and companies to develop and apply genomic advances to make a better world. That's everything from brain research to agriculture for a changing climate.
And if you enjoyed this episode, swing by your favorite podcast app, hit the subscribe button, and while you're there, consider leaving us a review. And don't forget, if you're listening to us, you can also go over to YouTube and watch this. You can find us there as well. So consider leaving a review, follow us. It really helps spread the knowledge.
Thanks for joining us.